We certainly keep hearing a lot about sustainability these days. Actually, it has come to a point long since where a guy like you and me can't even use the word anymore without somehow feeling pretentious. And I think a lot of that has to do with just about every major corporation we know quite literally pretending to be super sustainable, even though they've probably been in business for decades and have changed next to nothing in the way they operate. But I think it is sad that the word is being tainted and that actually more and more words are being taken away from us because they are misused until they become unusable. Here's a suggestion though of what sustainability could mean. It could mean do the thing you know is right, even when you live under circumstances that are wrong. And let me ask you to follow me once more on a trip to the scrapyards, looking for items that wouldn't have ended up there in a world that truly lived in accordance with that dictum. Down here we find a bunch of relays and fuses, and I make sure to salvage at least some of the relays because a lot of cool things can still be built with those. I wonder what these heavy chains here were used for once. Looking pretty massive, just like this piece of farming equipment here. Unfortunately, something that heavy is even still kinda expensive, even if you just pay the scrap price for it. Over here I found a pretty cool, rather unusual bench grinder, and I'm taking that one home. Next to this magnet here we find this old folding bike, and I'm going to buy that as well. These old gears here would make nice decorative pieces, but I guess I already have enough things lying around that I bought for that reason. This rugged steel frame here, on the other hand, will be very useful for another repair job we're going to perform today. In addition to these finds, I also got my hands on these military toolboxes. And believe me, there are some more interesting things I have in store for you today. Let us take a closer look at that bench grinder then. On the right hand side, two grinding discs have been installed in parallel, so to speak. The outer, very thin one has broken off though. The tool rest is also quite rusty. On the left hand side we find a cup-shaped disc. It's almost completely worn though. From the nameplate we learn that this machine was made by a company called Greif, which is the German name for Griffin. It was built for 380 volt 3-phase power. You could also run this on 230 volt single phase with a capacitor though. The lower nameplate implies that for grinding knives, the right wheel, including the axle holding it, can and should be detached from the machine. The remains of the old 3-phase power cord are completely falling apart. And I start the repair by detaching the old grinding wheels. When unscrewing these nuts on a grinder that is rotating towards you, the right wheel will have a right-hand thread and the left one a left-hand thread. This outer wheel here simply has two aluminium washers holding it, and I'm pretty sure that this is not part of the original setup, but rather an add-on by the former owner. The inner wheel is held by two rather massive machined washers made from steel, and we find a lot of residue inside that we will have to remove. This threaded rod here, holding the wheel, can, unlike normal grinders, be unscrewed out of the motor shaft. That is what the nameplate meant by detaching the right wheel. I've worked on a lot of bench grinders in the past, and many of them have really terrible tool rests. This one here is really ruggedly made, and I like that a lot, but it is very rusty and we'll have to do something about that. Quite unexpectedly, I can get this left-hand nut here off with ease. The cup wheel, however, is sitting very tightly on that shaft, and I use a mallet to tap on the other side until it ever so slowly starts coming off. I can now start to scrape off the grinder residue with this old screwdriver. In the next step, I want to have a look inside the switch enclosure before I proceed with any repairs. Inside we find a 3-phase rotary switch, and even though the old power cord is falling apart, the internal wires leading to the stator of the induction motor are still solid and in good condition. I also tested the switch with a continuity tester, and it works just fine. I have now started to connect a new power cable with new 16 amps 3-phase power plug to this grinder. I measured the resistance between the stator windings and they looked okay. And I will also just assume for the moment that the motor works. In my many repairs of old German quality tools, I almost never encounter damaged motors. When installing new power cords on any device or in any application, it is always important to secure the cable from being pulled out, which could lead to one of the phases getting in contact with the enclosure, for example. In this case, I have to tighten the nut on this cable gland. It protects the insides from humidity and dirt, but it is also a kind of strain relief. I do that with a Stahlwille wrench that I also found recently. I wish I had an entire set of those. In the meantime, I have already applied new grease to the bearings, but the wheel guard is still super dirty and all the small washers and nuts are super rusty and dirty as well. The ultrasonic cleaner isn't working properly anymore, but I want to get this repair finished first, so we'll have to rely on other methods then. I want to remove the rust once again with citric acid, but this will only work if the old paint, paper, rust and grime are properly removed first. I first use some soapy water, and after a few hours of soaking in, I use a wire brush to clean the parts. That wasn't good enough though to properly degrease the parts, and that's why they're getting a gasoline treatment next. I usually try not to do this anymore because of the fumes and the fire hazard, but gasoline, or petrol if you will, is just a great solvent and degreaser. After also wiping off and rinsing the parts, they are now ready for the acid bath. And as I've done it many times before, I simply dissolve some citric acid in warm water and I put the parts inside and wait a few hours. And you can already see the positive effect quite clearly, and most of the rust you still see can simply be wiped off with a towel now. In order to get a better surface finish, I simply clean the parts with steel wool in a final step. The guard is also cleaned in soapy water. The right wheel and wheel guard can now simply be reattached. In many cases in the past, I have gone for a completely new paint job, but in this case I like the old paint and it's going to stay. It was also unexpectedly easy to find a replacement for the cup wheel. It just appears to be a standard size that hasn't really changed in 60 years, and I think that's a good estimate for the age of this machine. It could be even older though. The grinder would now theoretically be ready for action again, but a bench grinder also needs a bench, right? Well, some kind of support wouldn't hurt, and I think that the steel frame we found on one of the scrapyards could fit that role just perfectly. As you can see, another cast iron enclosure of some kind was installed here, until it was, quite brutally, broken off. And I unscrew the remnants of whatever that might have been, and I grind off the rather uneven surface. Then I use a power drill to drill new holes to fasten the grinder in place. By the way, this Metabo drill was one of the repairs from the very first episode of this series. This is episode number 25. If you are interested in seeing more, well, then the other episodes are all linked down in the video description below. And after bolting the grinder in place, I think it might be time for a test. Okay, so it all seems to work fine. A future upgrade here though might be to install a detachable tool rest on this side as well. The next set of items that I want to take a look at are these military toolboxes that were formerly used by the German armed forces. For a change, these are not scrapyard finds. I bought them all together from a guy. They look really rough with many scratches, old stickers and labels and nasty tape stuck to the surfaces. The lid on this one is also stuck. They probably don't look like much right now, but I think they are diamonds in the rough and I have a pretty cool idea to make them more appealing. First of all, the old stickers and labels have to go. I actually like the looks of this old red sticker here, but it is only made from ordinary paper. It will not be able to withstand any amount of humidity or abrasion. I'm removing it with a blade, trying not to damage the paint underneath. Nasty old duct tape like this one is the worst, and I recommend that you never apply it to any painted surfaces or objects that mean anything to you. I again use a blade and then apply some penetrating oil to the surface. It's similar to WD-40, but essentially a no-name alternative. If you're lucky, it will dissolve the tape residue good enough so that you can just wipe it off with a rag or paper towel. In combination with penetrating oil, the rough side of a kitchen sponge can also work wonders. You only have to be careful not to apply too much pressure, or you will scratch the surface beneath. All of these boxes receive the same treatment. In this instance, I'm using a plastic ice scraper. I'm also able to get the stuck one open. And on one of the boxes, the bottom receives a new paint job because too much of the old paint was scraped off. I'm sending one of these boxes to a friend in America. The other ones I will probably keep for myself. I think they look pretty awesome. What do you think? In the beginning of this video, I've talked about the term sustainability on a very abstract level. But there are, of course, very specific topics where you can also talk about sustainability, and here is one example that not a lot of people, I think, have in mind. Now, this map here shows the situation in the middle of Europe around the end of the 1970s, and Germany, of course, is still split. Now, the eastern border of Germany today is right about here. And this state here, DDR or GDR, the German Democratic Republic, back then belonged to the Eastern Bloc, which of course, with the Warsaw Pact, was, well, the military antagonist to the Western states here that were mostly part of NATO. Germany was split in the middle, and when the Cold War would have gotten hot, so to speak, Germany would be the most likely place where that war, even a nuclear war, could have happened. So an enormous amount of money, energy, and resources, not just coming from Germany, but basically from all around the world, was focused in building military stockpiles, not just weapons, but also all kinds of equipment. And part of that is also tools and clothing, for example. And I've been trying to find new old stock items that have been built at that time, energy and resources that have already been spent, and I'm trying to use them in my life. Now I'm wearing these old overalls or coveralls or whatever you want to call them, jumpsuits, and they were made for mechanics of the West German Army, the Bundeswehr, back in the 1980s. They just fit me perfectly. So I bought as many of them as I could get because I figured that I might just wear them for the rest of my life, at least here at work. Then I also found all those different kinds of military bags that were made for the or by the NVA, the National People's Army of East Germany. And now I found something different, and that is inside this seemingly original packaging here. Now, waiting for at least 30 years inside this wax paper from the stocks of the NVA, I have an adjustable spanner made by WMW in the GDR, and it certainly looks like new. I can get more of these, but I'm testing at the moment to see if it's really good, and that's why you can see it being used on repairs throughout this video. And speaking of repairs, let's get on to the next one then. As you will remember, I also found this bicycle leaned against that huge magnet at the scrapyard. Now, I'm usually not a huge bicycle guy and I don't work on them often, but this is a folding bike and I have actually thought about buying one in the past. It's great to have one of those in your trunk or even take it with you on a train. Now you might think, not a huge bicycle guy, but here's a workbench just for bicycle work. Well, this is not my workbench. A friend of mine uses this bench to work on his bikes and I borrowed this for the day. This is the folding hinge and it could use some oil. The pedals are missing. The tires are both flat and you can see it was sitting in some basement for a long time. That part holding the dynamo is also totally bent out of shape. The bicycle is also incredibly dirty. The name of the manufacturer is Vaterland, which literally means fatherland. For the times we live in, it is certainly an unusual name for a company, but probably not when this company was founded in 1906. However, after about 100 years, they ceased operations in 2007. And as you can see, I'm cleaning the bike now, and I'm doing that with baby wipes. And no, I haven't become a dad or anything like that. I simply learned this from my buddy who happens to have kids, even though I'm sure he's not the first to come up with that idea. After that, I proceeded by oiling the folding mechanism, taking off the front and rear wheels, removing the chain guard, removing the old grease from the chain, and then applying new grease to it. Next, I decided to do something that I hadn't done for a few years, changing the inner tubes on bicycle wheels. I actually feel a little ashamed that I haven't done this in such a long while. I've probably just been driving way too much with my car and had neglected my bike for years. Nothing super dramatic, but having almost forgotten how to do simple bike repairs just seems like one of those things where your dad or grandpa would make fun of you for having lost touch with the real world. While replacing the tubes, I also found that this piece of rim tape wasn't sitting in the right place, and one of the spoke ends here must have been poking into the inner tube all the time. After having reinstalled the wheels, I add some halfway period correct lights and reflectors to the front and rear. And I'd say it already looks much better. And of course, you're not super fast and efficient on a tiny folding bike like that, but rather see it as a good thing to have in your trunk when on a road trip or visiting another city. But where to go, where to go? Well, hello, good sir. Have you heard of the 8th wonder of the world? Well, I'm not sure about the 8th, but certainly know the 7th, the Great Pyramid of Gizeh, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and so on. Oh, the Hanging Gardens. You must be kidding, good sir. The Hanging Train is what I'm talking about. That is what you must see. Okay, so the best use for a folding bike, in my opinion, really is to visit other cities, because it's no fun driving around with cars in city centers that you're not used to, and you're also very slow when you're on foot. So having a folding bike like that in your trunk is actually a pretty good idea, but to be honest, the combination of folding bike plus car isn't really riding in style. What is riding in style is folding bike plus monorail.